Citizen 54, Houston, how do shell companies work? Oh, man. Lots of ways. You can have your shell companies here in the US. You can have shell companies offshore. Essentially, it is a way to sort of hide ownership holdings from public scrutiny. Let's say you make 50 million bucks, right? You make $50 million. You don't want to necessarily pay taxes on it, so you might be selling something to make 50 million. I'm not talking about regular investment. So you would form a company, might be a Delaware company, South Dakota, Wyoming, somewhere that has privacy laws about revealing ownership of companies. And you form this private company in like Delaware. And then you might go to like the Caymans and form another company. So this company in Delaware owns a company in the Caymans. And that company in the Caymans might have the assets that you use to sell and make 50 million bucks. So then the money goes to the Caymans. It's owned by a Delaware company through you as a U.S. citizen, but it's unreportable because it's in the Caymans and you don't have to pay any taxes or whatever. You're skirting all sorts of tax laws. You can take a bunch of money, go to the Caymans, go to the British Virgin Islands, go to Aruba, go to Cyprus, go to Singapore, go to the Seychelles, any of those other banking havens around UK, and you can open up brokerage accounts and do your trading offshore, right? It's now a company that owns a brokerage account. It's doing the trading. It's trading in the U.S. markets. It's trading wherever else. And you are in a tax haven, so you don't have to pay taxes on what you trade. And the U.S. government goes, oh, I don't know, they're offshore. You can make shell companies with shell companies with shell companies with shell companies and make it almost impossible to figure out who owns certain things. You'll find rich guys, they might, they're like, maybe they got sued and they owe like $10 kajillion for a lawsuit. They'll take their entire wealth and stick it in some banks in like Belize and British Virgin Islands and whatnot, and make it offshore so that U.S. laws, someone writes something that says, the court says, oh, bank in Belize, you owe us this money because it was in a U.S. court case. Belize is like, fuck you. This is Belize. This is in the U.S. Your court rulings don't have any sway here. So oftentimes, like, let's say you are one of those people who would owe a bunch of taxes or owe a bunch in a lawsuit or something. You go to Belize, you open a bank account there. You then make a Cayman company that's attached to that bank account in Belize. That Cayman company now owns another company in the British Virgin Islands. That British Virgin Islands company owns a company in Cyprus. That Cyprus company owns a company in the Seychelles. Seychelles owns a company in the Bahamas. And that Bahamas company happens to own a house here in Seattle, Washington that you live in, right? So if anyone tries to trace back ownership of that house, they're going to get shell company after shell company after shell company, all in these offshore places, and they won't be able to figure out who the actual individual is who owns the house you live in. You can just say, I just rent, man. It's not my house. And there's nothing anybody can ever do about that, right? Maybe rent it for $1 a year from yourself, right? Because you have all these shell companies. So the shell companies are a great way to hide responsibility and to limit liability, because the shell companies would be limited liability companies. So you can easily, if that shell company gets sued for some reason, you just fold the shell company and move the assets to another one. Oops, gone. What are you going to do about it? So that's kind of the shell game the shell companies do. That's where the term comes from. And this was like the concept of these shell companies is fairly recent, 1950s, 1960s or so. And it came from like, how to describe this? It came from London, and London, as a banking center, had a hard time converting US dollars and British pounds and other currencies around the world. And there were laws about foreign banks being able to handle US currencies, but there was a loophole in London, because London doesn't have to obey US laws, that they could trade in these hard currencies, pounds and dollars and whatnot, and not have to follow US laws to do it. So a lot of nefarious people, dictators, warlords, drug runners, criminals, whatever, they could do their banking in London, trade in US dollars, in British pounds, and not have to worry about dealing with US banks to get that hard currency. And so the offshore banking phenomena sort of began there in the 1950s and 60s when England realized they could become this international banking hub. So a lot of laws in English banking are super antiquated for a reason, because it allows all this money, outside money, to come into the country. And then starting in the late 70s, early 80s, people in the US discovered that they could move their wealth to the Caymans, to the Bahamas, to Cyprus, to wherever, and they could avoid paying taxes. And so if you set up a company, a shell company, right, that's in the Caymans, that operates your construction firm here in the US or something, you could avoid all sorts of taxes because it's a foreign company. It's not an American company. And you can move money all over the world that way. It's sketchy, but it's how rich people work. The UN has been trying to get a treaty together to force a minimum corporate tax in every nation, and like 15%. Like no country could charge less than 15% corporate tax. So we would no longer have these tax havens. But the tax havens are fighting back because like the Caymans fight above their weight because they've got like trillions of dollars of money that's been offshored there for a population of like 200,000 people. And if they no longer get to be this tax haven because this UN agreement happens and they have to charge 15% taxes on everybody, then they're just gonna be like, well, if I combine the Caymans, it's so much easier to be back in the US, or I'll get charged 15%. So these little tax havens are fighting it.